The World Bank says Africa could be on the brink of an economic takeoff, as were China and India decades ago. The International Monetary Fund says that between now and 2015, 7 of the top 10 fastest growing economies are likely to be in Africa. These projections have spurred tremendous interest in the continent from major international investors, among them China. China's leaders have been traveling across the continent exploring opportunities and cutting investment deals in various sectors. Early this year, China's Vice President Hu Lingyu was in Zambia, where China has invested heavily.
Zambia is one of the African countries that has established official diplomatic relations with China in earliest stage. The two countries politically understand and support each other, economically mutually benefit, and sincerely collaborate.
Along with investment in mining, China loaned Zambia millions of dollars to construct a 50,000-seat stadium in the capital, Lusaka. Then President Rupiah Banda explained why Zambia needs investors like China.
A huge capital investment required for the project and constraints in our national budget, government was unable to undertake this project on its own.
Africa represents 14% of the world's population, and by 2027, the continent is projected to have more people than China or India. And if the forecasts hold, by 2050, 1 in every 4 people on the planet will be an African. A survey by African Rainbow Business Consultancy says the continent offered good potential growth even during the global economic downturn. Catherine Pulvermacher is the group's former chief executive.
And actually, when you start to look at the IMF forecasts for growth, what emerges is quite a different story. Amongst the few regions which is expecting positive economic growth, even after the financial crisis has been taken into account. And there are good reasons for that, because as a continent, it's actually got a very diverse product structure. And it simply has not been tapped into.
Analysts say that increased wealth combined with increased political stability has given Africa a previously unthinkable level of investment potential. Joining us now for further discussion on Africa's economic outlook is Stephen Hayes, President and CEO of the Corporate Council on Africa. The CCA is comprised of nearly 200 U.S. companies representing approximately 85% of U.S. private investment in Africa. Mr. Hayes, welcome to In Focus.
Thank you, Victor. It's good to be back.
Yes. Now, when you look across the continent, there's a lot of excitement, and especially China is so present. You see China in the West, in the South, in the East Africa, everywhere. What's happening? What is this magnetism?
I think China is to be commended for its vision in many ways. It sees, it understands right away to the key to its own development and its own economic future is absolutely tied to Africa. The fact is that it is to the United States as well, and I think we've been far more slow in getting and understanding that. But China sees not only the minerals, it's also invested in a number of other areas, and it's also in just about every country in Africa.
Mm-hmm. Now, in a few days, you will be hosting this U.S.-Africa Business Summit, which is an annual thing you do here in Washington, D.C. And what you're doing is you're looking at how U.S. companies can actually get business opportunities and invest in Africa. What has changed in Africa that makes it more attractive than perhaps it was a few years ago, particularly to American companies?
I think that the summit, which is every 2 years, is a good gauge of what's changed. I've been at CCA for 12 years. And when I first came, the talk was, well, the reason that things are slow in Africa is the governance issues, a range of other issues. What's changed now, I think that at least 50% of the problem of U.S. investment in Africa is not in Africa, it's in the United States. Our biggest challenge, I think, is convincing U.S. companies, on one hand, that Africa is important to them, and I think convincing the U.S. government and policy changes that I think are needed, convincing the U.S. government that Africa is in our highest national interest. We often say that, but we don't really show that. Mm-hmm. And I think that our economic future, our economic ties, our energy needs, our trade needs are tied to the largest untapped market. Africa, despite all the other investment from China and others, is untapped. And it's something that the U.S. needs to realize, and realize very quickly, that we need to be increasing investment in Africa, not just for the sake of Africa, but for the sake of America.
Very briefly, tell us about this upcoming summit. Who's meeting who? What is being discussed?
The summit would draw normally 1,000 to 1,500 people. It is really a meeting of business to business, but we have, as usual, about 50 to 100 ministers of government from Africa coming. We hope that we will have a very high-level speaker from the United States. We will have. We simply can't announce it yet. But it's really a meeting of 7 different sectors, and the bottom line is, how do we increase investment? It's far more focused than in the past, in the sense of we want to see policy changes coming out of this summit.
In a word, can you say that since the last time you had the summit 2 years ago, there has been a little more interest than there was previously?
Absolutely, no doubt about it. We're seeing more major companies come to CCA. Our membership is increasing. The types of companies that are coming to us and joining are increasing as well. So I'm very encouraged.
Yeah, okay, and that is October 5th to 7th?
October 5th to the 7th.
Here in Washington, D.C.
Right.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Hayes.
Thank you.
Stephen Hayes, President and CEO of the Corporate Council on Africa, joining us today on In Focus.